Every sunrise, I walked an abandoned dog through the neighborhood. "You're trespassing on private property," the HOA president threatened. Then one morning, police helicopters circled overhead. A captain climbed out and searched for me. "That dog belonged to a fallen officer," he informed me. "Her partner's request was that you keep him." The letter arrived in my mailbox on a Thursday morning with the official seal of the Pinewood Heights Homeowners Association embossed across the top. Inside was a notice of violation signed by Gerald Whitmore, HOA president, informing me that I had 72 hours to cease all unauthorized pet custody or face legal action, including fines up to $500 per day and potential eviction proceedings. The dog sleeping on my couch had been with me for 6 months, and according to this letter, every single morning walk had been a criminal act of trespassing because the animal technically belonged to no one, which meant he belonged to the HOA by default, which meant I was stealing community property. I read the letter 3 times. The logic was insane, but the legal threat was real. The whole thing started on a Sunday in March, when I found the dog collapsed next to a dumpster behind the grocery store on Oakmont Avenue. He was a German Shepherd, maybe 3 years old, skinny enough that I could count his ribs through matted fur. No collar, no tags, no microchip according to the emergency vet who scanned him while I stood there holding my credit card. The vet said the dog was dehydrated and malnourished but otherwise healthy, probably abandoned a week or 2 earlier based on his condition. I paid the $340 bill because leaving him seemed impossible, and I took him home thinking I'd find his owner, or at least a rescue that could take him. That was 6 months ago. Nobody ever came looking. I named him Atlas because he carried himself like he'd been holding up the world and finally got tired. Every morning at 5:45 a.m., we walked the same route through Pinewood Heights, down Maple Street, left on Birch, around the community park, back home before the sun fully rose. Atlas never barked, never pulled on the leash, just walked beside me like he'd been doing it his whole life. Other early risers waved at us. Mrs. Kensington, who jogged past at 6 a.m., always stopped to pet him. The mail carrier knew his name. For 6 months, everything was fine, until Gerald Whitmore decided it wasn't. I'd met Whitmore exactly twice before the letter. Once at a mandatory HOA meeting where he spent 90 minutes discussing proper mailbox paint colors, and once when he knocked on my door to inform me that my grass was 1/4 inch above the regulation height. He was 58 years old, retired from some finance job, and treated the HOA presidency like he was running a small nation. The man wore a blazer to check people's trash bins. His hair was always perfectly combed, his shoes always shined, and his smile never reached his eyes. When I called him after receiving the letter, he answered on the second ring. "Mr. Whitmore, this is Liam Garrison from 2847 Maple Street. I'm calling about the violation notice you sent regarding my dog." He interrupted me immediately. "That's not your dog, Mr. Garrison. That's an abandoned animal you've been harboring without permission from the HOA board. Per our bylaws, section 7.3, all pets must be registered and approved, and all stray animals found on HOA property become the responsibility of the association." I tried to explain that I'd found Atlas off HOA property, that I'd paid for his vet care, that no owner had ever surfaced. Whitmore cut me off again. "The animal has been residing on HOA property for 6 months, which establishes our jurisdiction. You have 72 hours to surrender the dog to animal control or face escalating fines. I'm documenting this conversation." He hung up. Atlas was asleep on the living room floor, his head resting on an old pillow I'd given him. He looked peaceful, comfortable, safe. The idea of taking him to animal control where he'd spend his days in a concrete kennel waiting for an owner who didn't exist made my hands shake. I spent that evening researching HOA bylaws, looking for any loophole that would let me keep him. Section 7.3 did exist, but it was written so vaguely that it could be interpreted a dozen different ways. I called my neighbor Veronica Wu, who'd been fighting with the HOA for years over her vegetable garden that apparently violated aesthetic standards. She laughed when I told her about Whitmore's letter. "That's his pattern," she said. "He finds something technically against the rules, then he hammers you with legal threats until you give up. He's trying to establish precedent. If he can force you to surrender the dog, he can use that ruling to control anything else he considers community property. Fight it. Document everything. Make him prove his case in actual court, not just through intimidation letters." I thanked her and hung up, but fighting seemed impossible when the rules were written by the same person enforcing them. The next morning, Atlas and I took our usual walk at 5:45 a.m. 2 houses down, I noticed Gerald Whitmore standing in his driveway with his phone pointed at us. He was filming, documenting the violation in real time. I waved at him. He didn't wave back, just kept recording as we walked past. The entire walk felt different, knowing we were being watched, knowing every step was being cataloged as evidence against us. When we got home, I checked my email and found a message from Whitmore sent at 6:03 a.m. with video attachment showing Atlas and me walking past his house. The subject line read, "Violation Documentation Day 1. This was going to be his routine. Every morning, documenting, building his case, making it impossible to argue that I didn't know the rules. I forwarded the email to Veronica, who responded with a single word: psychopath. By Wednesday, I had received 3 more emails from Whitmore, each with video footage of our morning walks. He'd also sent a formal letter to every resident on Maple Street informing them that I was in violation of HOA bylaws and that my continued defiance represented a threat to community standards and property values. The letter encouraged neighbors to report any sightings of the unauthorized animal. Mrs. Kensington knocked on my door that evening, looking embarrassed. "I just wanted you to know that I got Gerald's letter, and I think it's ridiculous," she said. "Atlas is the sweetest dog, and you've done nothing wrong. But Gerald has been calling me asking if I've seen you walking him, and I don't know what to tell him. I told her to tell the truth, that I wasn't hiding anything." She nodded and left, but I could see the worry in her eyes. Nobody wanted to be Whitmore's next target. The 72-hour deadline passed on Friday. At 9 a.m., I received a certified letter from the HOA attorney, a woman named Patricia Drummond, whose letterhead listed her as specializing in property law and homeowner disputes. The letter informed me that I was now subject to daily fines of $500 for continued violation of HOA bylaws, and that failure to comply within 7 days would result in a lien being placed on my property. I called Patricia Drummond's office and got her paralegal, who informed me that Ms. Drummond was unavailable, but would return my call within 24 hours. She never called back. Instead, I received another letter on Monday increasing the fines to $750 per day due to continued defiance and willful disregard for HOA authority. The math was brutal. 7 days at $750 was $5,250. 2 weeks would cost me over $10,000. A month would financially destroy me. This wasn't about Atlas anymore. This was about power, about Whitmore proving that nobody in Pinewood Heights could challenge his authority and win. If you are enjoying this story already, please subscribe to see more stories like this. I hired a lawyer on Wednesday, a guy named Russell Chang who specialized in HOA disputes and had a reputation for being aggressive. He charged me a $5,000 retainer and spent 2 hours reviewing my case. His conclusion was blunt but honest. Legally, you're in a gray area. The HOA bylaws are vague enough that Whitmore can interpret them however he wants, and unless you're willing to spend $20,000 to $30,000 fighting this in court over the next year or two, you're probably going to lose. My advice is to surrender the dog, pay whatever fines they've already assessed, and move on. It's not fair, but it's reality. I asked him if there was any way to win. He leaned back in his chair and said, "Only if you can prove the dog has an owner who gave you explicit permission to keep him. Then it's not a stray, it's a borrowed pet, and the HOA has no jurisdiction. But you said there's no owner." I nodded. He shrugged. "Then you're out of options." That night, I sat on the floor next to Atlas and tried to imagine taking him to animal control. He looked up at me with brown eyes that had started to trust again after whatever trauma had left him abandoned in the first place. 6 months of morning walks, of slowly watching him gain weight and confidence, of teaching him that not everyone would leave him behind. I'd failed dogs before. My childhood dog died when I was 13 because my parents couldn't afford the surgery he needed. I'd promised myself I'd never let that happen again, never let money or inconvenience determine whether an animal suffered. And here I was, backed into a corner by a man who cared more about HOA bylaws than living creatures. I couldn't surrender Atlas. I'd rather lose my house. Friday morning, I walked Atlas at 5:45 a.m., like always. Whitmore was in his driveway filming. I stopped directly in front of him and said loud enough for the video to capture, "I'm not giving up my dog, Gerald. Take me to court if you want, but Atlas stays with me." Whitmore smiled for the first time since this started. "You just admitted on camera that you're willfully violating HOA regulations, Mr. Garrison. Thank you for making this easier." He went inside, and I walked Atlas around the block trying not to shake. By noon, I had another letter from Patricia Drummond informing me that due to my public admission of guilt, the HOA was filing for an emergency injunction to have Atlas removed from the property within 48 hours. The hearing was scheduled for Monday at 2 p.m. at the county courthouse. Russell Chang called me that afternoon. "They're moving fast because they know they can win," he said. "The judge will see the video, see the bylaws, and rule in the HOA's favor. You need to prepare for that outcome." Saturday morning was different. At 5:30 a.m., before our usual walk, I heard helicopter noise. Not distant traffic helicopters, but close, low, circling directly over Pinewood Heights. I looked out my window and saw a police helicopter hovering above the community park, searchlights sweeping across the grass and walking paths. Atlas started barking, which he never did, something frantic and urgent in his voice. I grabbed his leash and stepped outside, trying to figure out what was happening. The helicopter circled lower, and I could see the police markings on its side. 2 patrol cars pulled into the neighborhood, lights off, but moving with purpose. One stopped at the end of my street. A uniformed officer got out and started walking toward my house, scanning house numbers. My first thought was that Whitmore had called the police, that somehow he'd escalated this beyond HOA disputes into criminal territory. But the officer wasn't looking at me with suspicion. He was looking at Atlas. The officer approached slowly, his hand near his belt, but not threatening. He was maybe 40 years old, trim and professional, with captain's bars on his uniform. His name tag read, Captain Reeves. "Mr. Garrison?" he asked. I nodded. Atlas had stopped barking but was standing rigid, his attention fixed on Captain Reeves in a way I'd never seen before. The captain looked at Atlas, then at me, then back at Atlas. "I need to ask you some questions about this dog," he said. Where did you get him? I explained the whole story. Finding him by the dumpster, the vet, 6 months of walks, the HOA violation. Captain Reeves listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he knelt down slowly and extended his hand toward Atlas. The dog's entire body relaxed. He walked forward and pressed his head against the captain's hand, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Atlas's tail was wagging. Captain Reeves stood up, his hand still resting on Atlas's head. "This dog's name is Valor," he said quietly. "He belonged to Officer Grace Bellamy, my partner for 6 years. She died 8 months ago responding to a domestic violence call. Suspect shot her through her patrol car window. She died before the ambulance arrived." The room tilted. I grabbed the porch railing to steady myself. Captain Reeves continued. "Valor was Grace's K-9 partner. They trained together, worked together, lived together. When she died, Valor was supposed to be retired and rehomed, but he escaped from the K-9 facility 2 weeks after Grace's funeral. We searched for him for months, posted flyers, checked shelters, tracked every possible lead. Nothing. We thought he was dead." I looked down at Atlas, who was pressed against Captain Reeves's leg, and suddenly everything made sense. The training, the discipline, the way he walked perfectly beside me every morning. He wasn't an abandoned pet. He was a police dog who'd lost his partner and spent months trying to find his way back to something familiar. "Why are you here now?" I asked. Captain Reeves pulled out his phone and showed me a photo. It was Whitmore's video, the one he'd sent to the HOA board and probably posted in some community forum. "Someone saw it and recognized Valor," he said. "We got the tip yesterday, tracked your address, and came out as soon as we could confirm. I should take him back to the facility, process him through the department, follow protocol. That's what I'm supposed to do." He paused, looking down at Valor. "But Grace left something in her will. It took us 8 months to find it because she'd written it years ago and updated it just weeks before she died. She specified that if anything happened to her, Valor should go to someone who'd keep walking him every morning, someone who wouldn't give up on him even when it was inconvenient. Someone like her." I didn't understand. "She didn't know me," I said. Captain Reeves smiled sadly. "No, but she knew what kind of person she wanted for Valor. Someone who'd find an abandoned dog and pay a vet bill they couldn't afford. Someone who'd walk him every morning even when the HOA threatened legal action. Someone who'd stand in front of a camera and say they'd rather lose their house than surrender him. Grace's will specified the criteria, not the person. When I saw Whitmore's video, when I saw you refusing to give up despite the fines and the legal threats, I knew you were exactly who Grace described." He handed me an envelope. "These are Valor's official papers, registration, medical records, and a letter from Grace that her lawyer is supposed to give to whoever takes him. You're his legal owner now, per the instructions of a fallen officer whose will is being executed through the police department. The HOA has zero jurisdiction over a police K-9's placement." I opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was Valor's paperwork, showing him as a registered police service dog, currently assigned to civilian owner Liam Garrison per the last will and testament of Officer Grace Bellamy, badge number 2891. There was also a handwritten letter on Grace's personal stationery. The handwriting was neat, purposeful, the words of someone who'd thought carefully about what to say to a stranger. "To whoever is reading this," the letter began, "if you're holding Valor's papers, it means something happened to me, and he found his way to you. Thank you for taking care of him. Thank you for not giving up when it would have been easier to drop him at a shelter. Thank you for the morning walks, and the patience and the love he needed after losing his partner. Valor is the best dog I've ever known. He's loyal, brave, and gentle, despite everything he's seen in 6 years of police work. He deserves to spend the rest of his life somewhere safe with someone who understands that he's not just a pet, he's family. Please keep walking him every morning. It's what he loves most. And please know that even though we've never met, I trust you completely, because Valor chose you. Dogs know things about people that we miss. If he stayed with you, you're exactly where he's supposed to be. Thank you for giving him the life I couldn't. Officer Grace Bellamy." I read the letter twice while Captain Reeves waited. Valor, I was still calling him Atlas in my head, sat between us looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in months. "You can still walk him every morning," Captain Reeves said. "Nothing changes except now you have the legal right to do it, and anyone who tries to stop you is interfering with the placement of a police service dog, which is a whole different category of legal trouble." He pulled out another document and handed it to me. "This is a letter from the police chief confirming Valor's status and your authority as his designated civilian handler. If your HOA president gives you any more trouble, show him this and tell him to call our legal department. We don't take kindly to people harassing the caretakers of our K-9 officers, especially ones placed by officers who died in the line of duty." The helicopter had landed in the community park, and I could see other officers gathered there, waiting. Captain Reeves explained that the whole department had been looking for Valor since Grace's death, that finding him alive and healthy after 8 months was something they needed to see for themselves. "Would you mind bringing him to the park?" he asked. "Some of Grace's old colleagues want to say hello. They've been carrying a lot of guilt about losing him. Seeing him happy would help." We walked to the park together, Valor between us, and I watched as a dozen police officers surrounded him with tears in their eyes. They knelt down, petted him, told him stories about Grace. One officer, a woman named Lieutenant Angela Foster, hugged Valor and sobbed into his fur. "I thought we failed you," she whispered. "I thought we let Grace down by losing you, but you found exactly where you needed to be." Another officer took photos, documenting Valor's reunion for the department records. Captain Reeves explained that these photos would go into Grace's memorial file, proof that her final wishes had been honored. By 7 a.m., the park was full of people. Neighbors had come out to see what the helicopter was about, and word spread quickly about the police dog who'd been living in Pinewood Heights for 6 months without anyone knowing his history. Mrs. Kensington was crying, telling anyone who'd listened that she'd been petting a hero every morning. Veronica Wu stood next to me and said, "This is the best possible outcome for dealing with Gerald Whitmore. You just became untouchable." At 7:30 a.m., Whitmore himself appeared at the edge of the park, his face red with anger. He marched up to Captain Reeves and demanded to know what was happening on HOA property without permission. Captain Reeves turned to him with an expression of complete professional courtesy. "Mr. Whitmore, I presume? I'm Captain Jonathan Reeves with the Metro Police Department. We're here executing the final wishes of a fallen officer regarding the placement of her K9 partner. This dog is now officially assigned to Mr. Garrison under Police Department authority, which supersedes any local HOA regulations. If you have concerns about that placement, you're welcome to contact our legal department, but I should warn you that interfering with a police K9's assignment is considered obstruction and is prosecutable under state law." Whitmore's mouth opened and closed without sound. His face went from red to purple. He looked at me, then at Valor, then at the dozen police officers surrounding us. "I'm filing a complaint," he finally managed. "This is inappropriate use of police resources for a personal dispute." Captain Reeves smiled. "Feel free. Our chief will be happy to explain why we spent resources locating a K9 who's been missing for 8 months and ensuring he's placed according to his deceased handler's wishes." He handed Whitmore a business card. "Here's the direct number to our legal department. They're expecting your call." Whitmore took the card, realized he had no leverage, and walked away without another word. Veronica leaned close and whispered, "He's going to spend the next week trying to find a loophole, but there isn't one. You won. If this story keeps your interest, please subscribe to get more stories like this." The next morning, I walked Valor at 5:45 a.m., like always. But this time I knew his real name and his real history. He walked exactly the same way he always had, but I understood now that it wasn't training I'd accidentally benefited from. It was muscle memory from 6 years of walking beside an officer who'd loved him enough to make sure he'd be taken care of even after she was gone. We passed Whitmore's house, and I saw him watching from his window, phone in hand, but not filming. He knew he couldn't touch us anymore. 3 days later, I received a formal letter from the HOA attorney withdrawing all fines and violations related to Valor's presence on the property. The letter was terse and professional, with no apology, just a statement that upon review of new information regarding the animal's status as a police service dog, the previous violations were being dismissed. Russell Chang called me laughing. "They folded completely," he said. "Whitmore probably threatened to fire Patricia Drummond for not catching the police K9 angle earlier. You're clear." I framed Grace's letter and hung it in my living room where I could see it every morning. Valor, I was slowly training myself to use his real name, seemed to understand that something had changed. He was more relaxed, more playful, like he'd been waiting for 8 months to know it was okay to stop searching and just be home. Captain Reeves visited twice in the following weeks, bringing Valor's favorite treats from the K9 facility and updating me on the memorial service the department was planning for Grace. They wanted to include Valor in the ceremony, he said. "Would you bring him?" I agreed immediately. The memorial was held on a Saturday in late April at the police headquarters. More than 200 officers attended, plus Grace's family, friends, and members of the community she'd served. Valor walked beside me in a formal K9 vest that Captain Reeves had provided, and when Grace's name was read aloud during the ceremony, Valor sat at attention like he'd been trained to do. Several officers saluted him. Grace's mother approached me afterward, an older woman with Grace's same gentle eyes. "Thank you for taking care of him," she said. "Grace would have been so happy knowing he found someone like you." We hugged, and I promised to send her photos of Valor's morning walks. The local news covered the story in May after someone leaked Whitmore's violation letters and Captain Reeves's response to a reporter. The headline read, "HOA, President tries to seize fallen officer's K9, faces police backlash." The article detailed the entire timeline, from my finding Valor to Whitmore's legal threats to the dramatic helicopter reunion in the park. The reporter interviewed Captain Reeves, who said, "This case represents everything right and wrong about how we treat animals and the people who care for them. Mr. Garrison did everything correctly. He found an abandoned dog, paid for medical care, provided a loving home, and refused to give up when faced with bureaucratic intimidation. Officer Bellamy specifically wanted Valor to go to someone exactly like him, and we're grateful the system worked the way it should have." The article also interviewed Whitmore, who declined to comment beyond saying the HOA had acted within its authority based on available information at the time. The article went viral. Within a week, I'd received messages from people across the country sharing similar stories of HOA overreach and expressing gratitude that Valor's story had a happy ending. A lawyer in California contacted me offering pro bono services to help other people facing similar situations. An animal rescue organization asked permission to use Grace's letter in their fundraising materials as an example of responsible pet ownership. Grace's police department created a scholarship in her name for K9 handler training, and Valor's story became the centerpiece of their fundraising campaign. By June, they'd raised over $50,000. Captain Reeves called to tell me that Grace's family had specified that part of the scholarship funds should go toward helping people adopt retired canines, ensuring more dogs like Valor found homes instead of being euthanized when their service ended. Whitmore resigned as HOA president in July. The official reason given was personal health concerns, but Veronica Wu told me the real story. The board had received dozens of complaints from residents who were horrified by his treatment of a fallen officer's canine, and several homeowners had threatened to sue the HOA for reputational damage caused by the negative press. Whitmore's resignation was the price of avoiding a complete board recall. His replacement, a retired teacher named Margaret O'Sullivan, sent me a personal letter apologizing for the HOA's actions and promising to review the pet policies to prevent similar situations. She also invited Valor to be the guest of honor at the community 4th of July celebration. We attended, and Valor spent the afternoon being petted by children and photographed with families who wanted to meet the famous police dog. By August, life had settled into a new normal. Valor and I still walked every morning at 5:45 a.m., but now people joined us sometimes. Mrs. Kensington brought her grandson, who was studying to be a veterinarian, and asked endless questions about K9 training. A teenager named Isaiah from 3 streets over started walking with us on weekends, telling me he wanted to become a police officer like Grace had been. Captain Reeves stopped by one morning and walked with us, sharing stories about Grace that made her feel real instead of just a name in a letter. She had this thing about sunrise, he said. She always said that if you could get up early enough to see the sunrise, you could handle anything the day threw at you. That's why she wanted Valor to keep walking in the mornings. It wasn't just exercise, it was a philosophy. I thought about that a lot as summer turned to fall. Grace had been right about more than just morning walks. She'd been right about persistence, about not giving up when things got hard, about trusting that doing the right thing would eventually matter, even if it cost you something in the short term. I'd been ready to lose my house fighting for a dog I'd known for 6 months, and it turned out that stubbornness was exactly what Grace had been looking for when she wrote her will. She'd understood that love isn't convenient, that real commitment means standing your ground when everyone tells you to walk away. Valor had found me at my lowest point, and in saving him, I'd saved something in myself too. October brought the first anniversary of my finding Valor by the dumpster. I marked the date by taking him back to that spot, which felt important somehow. The dumpster was still there, the grocery store unchanged, but everything else was different. Valor was healthy, confident, home. I was different too, more aware of what mattered, less willing to accept injustice just because fighting it was inconvenient. We stood there for a few minutes, and I thanked him out loud for choosing to stay with me all those months ago, for trusting a stranger who had no idea what he was taking on, for being patient while I figured out how to be what he needed. Grace's mother visited in November and brought photo albums showing Grace and Valor during their years together. We spent an afternoon looking through pictures of them at training exercises, community events, traffic stops, school visits. Grace had been 31 when she died, just 2 years older than I was now. She'd lived a full life in those 31 years, making a difference in ways I was still discovering. Her mother told me that Grace had always wanted Valor to retire somewhere quiet, somewhere he could just be a dog instead of a working K9. You're giving him exactly what she hoped for, she said. Thank you for that. December brought snow and shorter days, but Valor and I kept our morning walks. 5:45 a.m. in winter meant walking in darkness, the streetlights creating circles of gold against fresh snow. Valor loved the snow, playing in it like a puppy despite being almost 9 years old now. Other early risers waved at us, some stopping to chat about their own dogs or share stories about neighbors who needed help with something. The community felt different than it had a year earlier, more connected, more aware of each other. Veronica Wu said it was because of Valor, that his story had reminded people why communities existed in the first place, not to enforce rules, but to take care of each other. January marked the 1-year anniversary of Grace's death. The police department held a small memorial service, and I brought Valor wearing his formal K9 vest. Captain Reeves gave a speech about Grace's legacy, about the hundreds of lives she'd touched in her 6 years as an officer, about the way her final act of love for Valor had inspired the department to change how they handled K9 retirements. Because of Grace's will and Valor's story, the department had created a new program matching retired K9s with carefully screened civilian handlers instead of automatically euthanizing dogs who were too old to work. 7 dogs had been placed in the past year, all of them thriving. Grace's mother spoke too, thanking everyone who'd honored her daughter's memory by taking care of the K9 officers who served alongside human partners. She mentioned me specifically, saying that Grace would have loved knowing Valor had found someone who understood him. The morning after the memorial, I found an envelope taped to my front door. Inside was a note from Margaret O'Sullivan, the new HOA president, informing me that the board had voted unanimously to name the community park the Officer Grace Bellamy Memorial Park. A plaque would be installed in spring with Grace's photo, Valor's photo, and the story of how an HOA dispute became a lesson in doing the right thing. The note ended with a request. Would I be willing to speak at the dedication ceremony about what Grace's letter had meant to me and what Valor had taught the community about loyalty and love? I agreed immediately. Spring arrived with cherry blossoms and longer days. The park dedication ceremony was scheduled for a Saturday in April, exactly 2 years after Grace's death. The entire community turned out, along with Grace's family, the police department, local press, and people who'd followed Valor's story online and driven hours to attend. I spoke for 10 minutes, reading parts of Grace's letter and explaining how a simple act of finding an abandoned dog had changed my entire understanding of what it meant to commit to something beyond yourself. Valor sat beside me during the speech, and when I finished, the crowd stood and applauded not for me, but for him, for Grace, for the idea that love persists even after loss. The plaque was beautiful, bronze, mounted on a stone base, with photos of Grace in uniform and Valor in his K9 vest. The inscription read, "Officer Grace Bellamy, Badge 2891, gave her life protecting this community. Her partner Valor gave his loyalty without question. This park honors both their service and reminds us that love, courage, and dedication endure beyond any single lifetime. May we walk forward together every morning, just as they did." The plaque listed Grace's years of service, her commendations, and the date of her death. It also included a smaller note. Valor resides in Pinewood Heights with Liam Garrison, fulfilling Officer Bellamy's final wish that he spend his retirement walking every sunrise with someone who would never give up on him. Now it's been 3 years since I found Valor. He's 11 years old, moving slower, but still insisting on our morning walks. 5:45 a.m., every single day, we walk through the neighborhood that tried to take him away and ended up honoring him instead. Kids stop us constantly, asking to pet the famous police dog. Adults thank me for fighting the HOA, for showing them that standing up for what's right sometimes means risking everything. I've received letters from people facing similar situations, asking for advice or just sharing their own stories of bureaucratic absurdity. I try to answer them all with the same message Grace gave me. Love is inconvenient. Commitment is hard. Do it anyway. Valor's health is declining. The vet says he has maybe a year left, maybe 2 if we're lucky. His hips are failing, his eyesight is going, but his spirit is unbreakable. Every morning when I grab his leash, he stands up with the same determination he had 3 years ago. We walk slower now, stopping more frequently, but we still make it around the full route. Past Whitmore's old house, now owned by a young family with 3 kids who adore Valor. Past Mrs. Kensington's place, where she always has treats waiting. Past the memorial park where Grace's plaque reminds everyone who sees it that service means something. I think about Grace constantly. I never met her, never heard her voice except through that letter, but she shaped my life in ways I'm still discovering. She taught me that planning for death doesn't mean giving up on life, that leaving instructions for the people and animals you love is an act of profound care. She taught me that loyalty isn't just a human trait, that Valor's dedication to finding a new home after losing her was its own kind of heroism. She taught me that sometimes the right thing is also the hard thing, and you do it anyway because the alternative is betraying everything you claim to value. When Valor dies, and I know that day is coming sooner than I want to accept, I'll make sure he's buried next to Grace. Captain Reeves has already arranged it with the police cemetery. Valor will get full honors, a flag-draped casket, a formal ceremony with bagpipes, and a 21-gun salute. He earned it through 6 years of service and 3 years of teaching a community what love looks like when you strip away convenience and comfort. His headstone will read, Valor, K9, partner to Officer Grace Bellamy, faithful to the end. I'll be there when they lower him into the ground. I'll stand next to Grace's family and the police department and everyone whose life was changed by a dog who refused to give up. And I'll thank him one last time for choosing me, for staying with me, for showing me what Grace already knew, that the best things in life are the ones you fight for even when everyone tells you to walk away. This morning, Valor and I walked at 5:45 a.m., like always. The sunrise was spectacular, pink and gold spreading across the sky like a promise. We stopped at the memorial park, and I read Grace's inscription out loud because it feels right to remind myself why we do this every day. Valor sat beside me, patient and calm, and I thought about all the mornings we've had together. Hundreds of sunrises, thousands of steps, one continuous act of showing up. Grace was right about everything. The morning walks weren't just about exercise or routine. They were about proving to yourself that you could handle whatever came next, that you were strong enough to meet the day on your own terms, that you wouldn't quit just because things got hard. I'll keep walking Valor every morning until he can't walk anymore. And then I'll keep waking up at 5:45 a.m. because that's what the commitment means. It doesn't end when it gets inconvenient. It doesn't stop when the reason for it is gone. It continues because love is bigger than loss, because honoring someone's memory means living the way they taught you to live. Grace gave me more than a dog. She gave me a purpose, a community, a reason to be better than I thought I could be. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to deserve that gift. And every morning when I see the sunrise, I'll remember that somewhere, somehow, Grace knew exactly what she was doing when she wrote that letter to a stranger. She was saving both of us. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.